Imagine you're crossing the vast, lonely Kansas prairie in the early 1870s. You've been riding for days. You're starving, exhausted, and desperately thirsty. Then, out of nowhere, a tiny cabin appears on the horizon. A small sign reads, "Groceries, meals, lodging." You think to yourself, thank God. You walk inside. A warm fire is crackling. A beautiful young woman smiles at you from across the room and invites you to sit down for supper. The food smells incredible. You take a seat at the table, your back facing a simple canvas curtain. You never see what's on the other side of that curtain, and you never leave that cabin alive. I am Teoro. Welcome back to Dark Files, the channel that goes where history is too afraid to look. If this is your first time here, I want you to stop right now and hit that subscribe button, because what we uncover on this channel is unlike anything you'll find anywhere else. We dig into the darkest corners of true crime, forgotten history, and the mysteries that have haunted humanity for centuries. And today we are cracking open one of the most chilling, most bizarre, and somehow most forgotten criminal cases in American history. We're talking about the Bloody Benders, a seemingly ordinary frontier family who turned their roadside inn into a killing ground. A family who may have murdered over a dozen people in cold blood. A family who built a murder house a full 2 decades before H.H. Holmes. A family that vanished without a trace and was never brought to justice. Here's the question I want you to hold in your mind throughout this entire video. How does an entire family of serial killers simply disappear off the face of the earth? Stay with me, because the answer, or rather the terrifying lack of one, is going to haunt you. Part 1. The Frontier. Setting the stage. To understand the Benders, you first have to understand the world they lived in. Because the Kansas prairie in the 1870s was the perfect hunting ground for predators of every kind. After the Civil War, the United States government opened up massive stretches of land in Kansas for homesteading under the Homestead Act of 1862. Thousands of settlers, immigrants, and travelers poured westward looking for opportunity, land, and a fresh start. But this was wild, untamed territory. Roads were rough dirt trails. Towns were sparsely populated. And law enforcement? Almost non-existent. If a person went missing on the Osage Trail, a major road cutting through southeastern Kansas, it might be weeks before anyone even noticed. Maybe months. Maybe never. Travelers were known to disappear all the time. Attacks from bandits, bad weather, disease. There were 100 explanations nobody could disprove. This is the world the Benders chose, and they chose it deliberately. Could something like this happen today? I want you to think about that and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Part 2. Meet the Benders. The Bender family arrived in Labette County, Kansas, sometime around 1870 to 1871. They were 4 in total. First, there was John Bender Sr., the patriarch, a large, brutish, and mostly silent man in his early 60s. Neighbors described him as unsettling. He rarely spoke, rarely smiled, and when he looked at you, people said it felt like being sized up. Then there was May Bender, whose real first name has never been confirmed. She was described as heavyset, loud, and deeply aggressive. Neighbors who interacted with her said she had a vicious temper and a disturbing intensity. Some described her as almost feral. She was rumored to have practiced some form of spiritualism, which was trendy at the time, but the way she practiced it made people deeply uncomfortable. Then there were the 2 adult children. John Bender Jr., who was in his late 20s, odd and nervous, prone to sudden bursts of laughter at nothing at all. He was widely regarded by locals as strange but mostly harmless. People underestimated him. That was a mistake. And finally, Kate Bender, the one who drew people in. Kate was in her mid-20s, physically attractive, charismatic, and dangerously intelligent. She presented herself publicly as a spiritual healer and lecturer, even advertising her seance and healing services in local newspapers. She was bold, educated-sounding, and magnetic. If the Bender operation was a spider's web, Kate was the silk. Now here's something historians still debate, and I want you to think about this. Were John Sr. and May actually the biological parents of John Jr. and Kate? Some researchers believe the 4 weren't truly a family at all, but rather a criminal partnership of some kind, possibly lovers. Possibly associates who adopted the family cover to appear more trustworthy to travelers passing through. Because nothing says safe lodging like a wholesome frontier family, right? Do you think the Benders planned this from the very beginning, or did the killing escalate gradually over time? Let me know your theory in the comments. Part 3. The IN and a house designed to kill in 1871. The Benders established their operation. A small one-room cabin along the Osage Trail in Labette County, which they operated as a combination grocery store, inn, and diner. It was one of the only establishments for miles around on this particular stretch of road, making it a natural stopping point for weary travelers. But the cabin was not what it appeared to be. The single room was divided in half by a large canvas curtain, hung from the ceiling. On one side was the public area, the grocery store and dining space. On the other side was the Bender family's living quarters. Travelers would be invited to sit at the dinner table, which was positioned with their back to that curtain. While Kate distracted the guest with conversation, food, and her considerable charm, someone on the other side of the curtain, almost certainly John Sr., would wait with a large hammer or geological pick. And when the moment was right, they would swing it through the curtain with full force, striking the guest at the base of the skull. The victims were then dropped through a trapdoor hidden beneath the table into a small cellar below the cabin. Throats were slashed there to ensure death. Bodies were later carried out to the orchard behind the inn and buried in shallow graves. Stop and think about that for a second. This family didn't snap one day. They engineered this. They built a murder house with a purpose-designed curtain, a strategic seating position, and a concealed trapdoor years before H. Holmes built his famous murder castle in Chicago. The Benders were doing it first. And almost nobody remembers them. Had you ever heard of the Benders before today? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Part 4. The victims who did the Benders kill. The confirmed victim count is at least 11. Though many researchers believe the true number is significantly higher, possibly exceeding 20. The victims were primarily male travelers, though the Benders showed no true preference. Among the confirmed dead was Dr. William York, a well-respected physician from Independence, Kansas. His disappearance in March of 1873 would ultimately be the Benders' undoing, because Dr. York had powerful, connected family members who refused to let his disappearance be brushed aside. There was also George Launcher and his 18-month-old daughter, whose tiny body was found buried alongside him in the Benders' orchard, an infant. Let that sink in. A Catholic friar named Father Paul Ponziglione visited the Bender Inn, but grew deeply uneasy and left before sitting down for a meal. He later said he couldn't explain the feeling, just a cold, overpowering sense of dread. He was almost certainly minutes away from becoming a victim. His gut feeling saved his life. When authorities finally excavated the orchard behind the cabin in May of 1873, they found grave after grave. Bodies with skulls caved in, throats cut ear to ear. The cellar beneath the trapdoor was soaked in dried blood, and a depression in the ground matched the shape of a human body that had been held there, bleeding out. It is one of the most gruesome crime scenes in the history of the American frontier. What do you think drove the Benders to target travelers? Was it purely financial or something far darker? Share your theory below. I read every single comment. Part 5. The investigation and the vanishing after Dr. York went missing. His brothers, including Colonel Alexander York, launched an aggressive search. Colonel York actually visited the Bender Inn personally while searching and spoke directly to Kate. She calmly suggested the colonel check further down the trail for his brother. She looked him in the eyes and lied without flinching. By the time a community search party organized a systematic sweep of the area in May 1873, the Benders were gone. The cabin was abandoned. The livestock were left wandering. A foul smell coming from the property drew investigators closer, and then they found the graves. A manhunt was launched immediately. Posses fanned out across Kansas. Telegrams were sent to neighboring states. Wanted posters went up, and yet nothing. The Benders had vanished like ghosts into the prairie. And here is where the mystery truly begins. Because in the decades that followed, there were multiple reported sightings and alleged captures, none of which were ever conclusively confirmed. In 1889, 2 women were arrested in Michigan and claimed to be May Bender and Kate. They were held for trial, but the case collapsed due to a lack of definitive identification. Were they the real Benders? To this day, no one knows for certain. There are theories that a posse of vigilantes did catch the Benders and quietly executed them on the prairie to avoid a lengthy trial, then kept silent about it for decades. Some aging Kansas men allegedly made deathbed confessions to this effect. But no bodies matching the Benders were ever conclusively identified. Do you think the Benders were caught and quietly executed, or did they escape and live out their days somewhere in complete anonymity? This is a big one. I genuinely want to hear your theory in the comments. Part 6. The Connections, Benders, Holmes, and Jack the Ripper. Now let's just talk about why the Benders deserve a place alongside the most infamous killers in history, and why their story has been unfairly overshadowed. Holmes built his murder castle in Chicago in the early 1890s, a hotel with hidden rooms, gas lines, and a crematorium. He is widely called America's first serial killer. But the Benders were operating a purpose-built kill room 20 years earlier. The trapdoor, the curtain, the strategic furniture placement. This is organized, premeditated architectural murder, and it predates Holmes entirely. Then there's the Jack the Ripper parallel. The Ripper terrorized London in 1888 and was never caught. His identity remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. The Benders were never caught either. And just like the Ripper, they left behind a legacy of unanswered questions that has fueled theories, investigations, and obsessions for over 150 years. Some fringe theorists have even attempted to connect Kate Bender to the Ripper murders. The timeline doesn't hold up well, but it speaks to how deeply this family embedded themselves into the mythology of true crime. What makes the Benders uniquely terrifying isn't just what they did, it's that they did it as a family unit. 4 people bound by blood or bond who collectively decided to become predators, who built a system, who worked in silence and coordination. Serial killing is rare. A family of serial killers operating a coordinated murder enterprise? That is almost unprecedented in recorded history. Part 7. The legacy, why we forgot them. Here's the question that genuinely unsettles me. Why don't more people know about the Benders? Holmes has movies, books, and documentaries. Jack the Ripper has an entire industry built around his mystery. But the Benders, who operated earlier, killed as an organized family unit, built their own murder house and were never caught, remain largely absent from mainstream true crime culture. Part of it is the era. The 1870s American frontier didn't have the same media infrastructure as Victorian London or Gilded Age Chicago. News traveled slowly. Documentation was poor. The case, for all its horror, was geographically isolated in rural Kansas. Part of it may also be the lack of resolution. True crime stories tend to get the most traction when they have a clear ending, a trial, an execution, a conclusion. The Benders have none of that. They are an open wound in history, a cold case with no final chapter. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what makes them the most frightening of all. Do you think unresolved cases are scarier than solved ones? Why? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where you stand on that. Outro: the bloody Benders, killed in broad daylight, behind a curtain, in a cabin on an open prairie, with neighbors and travelers just miles away. They smiled, they cooked meals, they held seances. And then they killed and buried and did it again. And then they walked away, into the grass, into the wind, into history and out of it. We will likely never know what truly happened to the Bender family. We will never know how many people they actually killed. We will never know whether justice, official or otherwise, ever found them. But we know they existed. We know what they built. And we know that somewhere in the Kansas prairie, the ground still holds the echoes of what happened inside that little cabin on the Osage Trail. So here's my final question for you, and I really want to hear your answer. If the Benders were alive today, do you think they'd be caught? With modern forensics, DNA, surveillance cameras, digital footprints, would the prairie be enough to hide them? Tell me what you think in the comments below. If this video gave you chills, if it made you think, then you know what to do. Hit subscribe. Ring that notification bell. Because at Dark Files, we are just getting started, and the cases we have coming up next will make your jaw drop. As always, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, the most terrifying stories aren't the ones that were made up.